Scientists have reached the ends of the universe, but no one was prepared for such discoveries. The story begins in a spaceship laboratory. An alarm sounds and the fire extinguisher is activated. I hear two men arguing. One of them claims that his partner has gone insane. A fight broke out, one of them grabbed a pair of pliers and threatened a colleague. I see a strange ship outside. Emit around, bright light. Another ship's clock now points to 6 o'clock. Lieutenant Colonel and ship's pilot Harold Richards woke up and immediately did a few push-ups before getting on his stationary bike. His partner, Dr. Abe Anderson, wants to get some sleep, but he reluctantly gets up and makes coffee. He adds a little alcohol to his drink. After training, Harold goes to the lab, writes data into logs, and examines vials containing bees. He then feeds the electric eels that live in the tanks on board. Finally, he examines his surroundings with a periscope, but all he sees is darkness. Your ship is also round, absorbing light on one side and looking like smoke on the other. While the person in charge, Harold, is at work, his partner, Abe, is doing nothing, drinking alcohol from his bag, wearing sunglasses and watching TV. Having finished his duties, Harold brewed coffee, sat down on the sofa, and shoved a pile of liquor bags aside him. Richards informs Anderson that they are approaching. Abe, on the other hand, believes they are still far from their goal and their entire mission is pointless. Harold silently stood up and left the room. The next morning, Harold does push-ups again and goes to the lab. Here, Mr. Abe re-enters the bee data while he continues to sleep. Harold then throws the fish into a tank with electric eels and accidentally drops the pen into the water. The man tries to grab it, and the military pendant around his neck also falls into the water. Suddenly, the eel touches the metal token, electrocuting Harold. The man fell and the ship lost power for several seconds. Abe wakes up and goes looking for Harold. As soon as the man left the room, he saw his partner's dead body. The hysterical Abe throws a sack at Harold and drags him over the ship. The man opened the airlock and deposited his colleague's body in it, but was reluctant to pull the lever to launch his colleague into space. He went into the control room and tried to figure out how everything worked. He queries the computer to find out how far it is from the edge of the Earth and the universe. However, computers cannot calculate this. The ship flies further into darkness and the unknown. Anderson exits the cockpit. He wakes up near an airlock, where he falls asleep and wants to see his friends. Rising off the ground, he accidentally hit the lever and the ship threw the sack outward. Abe panicked and ran to the periscope, convinced of his fear. His partner's body floated in the air. Confused Abe now has no choice but to continue on his own. The man fell asleep again as stormy weather spread around the ship. Lightning awakens Abe. Approaching the porthole, the frightened man sees the eyes of a giant electric stingray coiling around the ship. The shocked man drinks another pack of liquor and lies down on the floor again. After he sobers up, he revisits the footage of himself and Harold taken on the trip. Anderson tells organizers that one of his secondary objectives was to observe the effects of weightlessness on bees. However, the insects did not live long, so the research results are inconclusive. Harold added that there was also a pinball machine, but it was broken. The host presents the status quo with a primary objective: will they soon reach the end of the universe? Abe believes it will take a long time to find out. But he is sure that when they stop looking at the stars, they will reach their destination. When the transmission is over, Abe makes a noose out of wire. He hung it around his neck, took out a picture of her wife, and said goodbye to her in her mind. Suddenly something rocks the ship. The man loses his balance and gets nervous. Abe gets into the window booth. He is blinded by bright white light. The man put on his glasses and excitedly tried to see what was outside the ship. We travel back in time to 13 years before him. Weatherford says. She talks about upcoming space missions and demonstrates theoretical calculations. She then called Abe out of the audience and introduced him to other scientists as an outstanding marine biologist. Dr. Anderson is pleased that all theoretical hypotheses will soon be put into practice. One of the scientists in the audience believes that such a mission poses great unnecessary risks and the theory needs to be studied more closely. But Weatherford believes the risk is fully justified. After that, he summons Harold, who has already been selected as the module operator, from the hangar. Physicians are confident that they will always achieve their goals. Harold shook hands with Prime Minister Abe, and journalists and photographers captured the momentous occasion. Below is the process of preparing for Prime Minister Abe's space travel. Along the way, the scientist is examined, questioned, and informed of his rights. Dr. Weatherford is very fascinated by the multiverse. She looks at the blackboard and does the math, and she claims the universe is much more complex than previously thought. She believes the fictional nature of the universe should not be underestimated. But the very concept of reaching that end is beyond imagination. Impossible to imagine. Abe was completely confused and suddenly lost consciousness. Nurses tried to resuscitate him. They asked the scientist to sign some papers, and the doctor told them to consider the scientist's low stress tolerance. After practice, Harold comes back. He encourages Abe and helps him get back on his feet. Dr. Weatherford gets excited about a future astronaut, but Abe suddenly faints again. The story goes back to when Harold was still alive, on a spaceship during his journey. He noticed the airlock malfunction and tried to adjust the system. However, since the automatic waste disposal does not work, it is necessary to operate the lever manually. Harold tells Abe, "You're going to be in trouble," and Abe laughs as he examines the lever. My teammates still enthusiastically enjoy their time on board. Anderson works side by side with Richards and takes care of the bees. Suddenly, Harold finds himself breaking the rules and feeding sardines to eels himself. The scientist reminds him that this is very dangerous, but Harold doesn't listen because he enjoys the activity. At night, Anderson drew something in his notebook, looked through the periscope, and one of the galaxies appeared before him. Later, while Harold wasn't looking, Abe pulled out a suitcase full of supplies. A bottle of sardines fell out and the man quickly put it back in. He then puts the suitcase in the airlock and throws it away, forcing Harold to stop feeding the eels, putting himself in danger. Satisfied with his job, he heads to Harold's control pod. Harold steers the ship by pressing many buttons. Abe approached him and asked why he would do this when the ship itself is on autopilot. Suddenly the red button on the control panel lights up. Harold rushes to push, but Abe stops him. He's playing around and wants to see what happens if he doesn't do anything. Harold got mad at his partner and suddenly punched him in the face. Abe only laughs because Harold hasn't pressed the button yet, but nothing really happens to the ship. Because of this, Harold questions the usefulness of his own work. And when Mr. Abe walks away, the man sends a request to the computer asking if these buttons should be pressed. The next day, Harold Abe asks where he left the sardines. Anderson laughs and says he sent her into space. Harold attacks his partner, only to find that Abe has already attacked him. Richard stops and instead takes a picture of Anderson's wife and rips it up. As Abe looks at the torn photo, he suddenly hears a strange noise coming from another part of the ship. As the man approaches the sound, he suddenly finds himself in a room full of people. These are the people who greeted the two teammates sent to the edge of the universe at the beginning of the movie. The astronauts thank the people who were there and raise a toast to space. There he drinks his first carton of alcohol, but he soon starts drinking more. We will ship even earlier. Another day, Mr. Abe will go to the laboratory. Here he examines several dead bees. One of them was examined under a microscope and found to be dead for unknown reasons. He returns to the window room, where he has a view of the star-studded universe. Morning will come again. The same routine that has been going on for years is repeated. Mr. Abe lies down on the sofa and falls asleep. Harold discovers that the eel automatic feeder is broken. He searched the entire ship for his companions, entered the window room, and found that the stars were still visible. Soon after, he found his colleague asleep. Abe laments that he didn't do anything that day, but Harold insists that everyone needs a break from time to time. The next day, Abe decides to fix the arcade machine. He is busy dealing with many cables and sensors, but suddenly a short circuit occurs that cannot be repaired. At the same time, Harold takes out a can of sardines and feeds the eels himself. In the evening, Richards asks Anderson if he was able to fix the machine. Abe says no, he made a necklace and bracelet out of wire. Harold tells his partner not to be stupid. When Abe opens a locker to look at jewelry, a photo of his wife falls out. The man thought he had lost it, so he's happy. The story picks up again. It's a new day on the spaceship. Harold cheerfully asks Abe what he will do today. Anderson replies that the hive is already ready for harvest and that the bees must be taken care of today. Harold is thrilled by this news and says he loves his space lover. Anderson goes to the lab where the bees are still alive. He records the data in his observation log and adjusts the gas flow to the hive. After that was done, Abe entered a room with windows. The scenery seen from the ship has also changed greatly. Everything outside is bathed in orange light. Apparently this is the beginning of the journey and the astronauts can still see the sun. Intrigued, Abe takes out a picture of his wife, holds it up to the glass, and continues to look at it. Harold and Abe meet and happily share their observation that the ship is still flying and the bees are still buzzing. Prime Minister Abe reported that it will be possible to collect space honey as early as the next day. A teammate enters the control booth. Abe came here for the first time. He looks around and asks Harold if he knows how everything works. Richards responds subduedly, comparing the ship's maneuvering only in space to driving his skis. Suddenly something happens on the ship. In the evening Harold plays with the still working machines. They want to set a new in-game record, but Abe interferes and the match ends. Meanwhile, the spacecraft approaches a huge orange object. A new day begins. Abe prepares to collect space honey and Harold goes to the pantry for bread. Mysterious lightning strikes around the ship. Abe goes to the porthole again to see Harold, who usually doesn't like being in his room. Harold doesn't understand what Abe likes about this place so much. Anderson replies that he likes to look at stars and planets because they are beautiful. Richard sadly says his wife is prettier. Abe wants to know why he chose to accept the mission and leave the mission. Harold initially said it was a state request, but added that the main reason was a significant tax cut for his family. He could not refuse such an offer. Abe, on the other hand, says science was what inspired him to take this trip. The men think what they will find. Apparently there is more than you think. Maybe there is another reality out there, a completely different universe. Abe, meanwhile, is enthusiastically setting records for arcade machines. Harold brings bread and reminds his partner of honey. They sample space honey and continue talking about their families and why they agreed to fly. Harold takes a picture of Abe's wife and he wonders how he was able to break up with her. Anderson said he regretted his wife leaving him, which is why he wanted to fly as far as possible, not for science. Abe can't seem to let go of the arcade machine. Suddenly, the machine makes a strange noise and Abe realizes it is broken. At that moment, an alarm sounds inside the ship. The system reports that the number of insects in the laboratory has decreased. All the bees die and fall to the bottom of the hive. Mr. Abe has been unable to sleep all night and is thinking about his wife. As he turned to the side, he briefly saw two other astronauts sitting at a table. The next day, Harold finds Abe's notebook with his own drawings on it. He asks his partner what it is and Abe confirms that it is the still living corpse of Harold. Anderson is happy to report that this is a good sign, but Richards doesn't know what yet means. Abe promises to explain later, but Harold suddenly lashes out at him, saying he's trying to hurt his partner. Richards threatens Anderson with pliers and demands that he explain why he continues to paint on his body. Abe says he painted Harold after the accident. He remembers different things and draws them. Harold thinks Abe is crazy. But Anderson says it all started with the bee. He made hundreds of sketches and started drawing the body of a bee, only to find that the bee actually died. Harold sees a photo of himself being electrocuted by an eel. And we are observing multiple versions of this event in different universes. Abe is also watching over us. Even Prime Minister Abe himself does not know how to explain it. He sketches and tries to remember what this event is and when it will happen. Abe also believes this is not just happening to them. In fact, in Abe and Harold's room, his two other partners are seen discussing the same issue. Richards can't get over the idea that the eel might be the cause of his death. He still doesn't understand how Abe knows that. Anderson himself does not know what is happening to him. He shows his partner more paintings such as White Crack in the Dark. Meanwhile, Harold attempts to figure out exactly how the eels inflict fatal damage on him, dipping his hand in a tank and electrocuting him. Abe retrieves the bag, but suddenly looks back at his drawing with tears in his eyes. Suddenly he runs to the porthole to see what's going on outside, but all he sees is darkness. The man lunges at the bundle of wires and tries to tear it, only to find that Harold has taken the pliers. He returned to his partner, turned his body over, and saw pincers sticking out of his chest. Abe picks up his tools, goes back to the wires, and cuts one of them. Hearing strange sounds, he pulls the whole bunch towards himself. The wires start sparking and the ship rocks. Mr. Abe ran to the porthole and watched as the ship veered off course and plunged into darkness like a wall. The darkness begins to crack, eventually shattering into pieces. Darkness is replaced by blinding white light. Suddenly, I saw Mr. Abe at home. He picked up the remote control and turned off the TV, saying he had seen this before. He went out into the garden and met his wife. Suddenly the phone rings inside the house. Abe answers the phone and returns. Dr. Weatherford told Anderson that the position he had applied for was already filled. Confused, Abe reaches for a newspaper with a photo of two other astronauts. The story returns to the spacecraft with other astronauts on board. They face big trouble as one of the men tries to fix a bug in the system and cuts the wrong wire in the process. The ship collapses and is swallowed by darkness. What do you think happened on the ship? Was it all a figment of Prime Minister Abe's imagination? Or did the protagonists discover the multiverse? End. Conclusion. In a mind-bending twist, the story blurs the lines between reality and imagination, leaving us pondering the true nature of the journey. Whether a product of Prime Minister Abe's subconscious or a venture into the complexities of the multiverse, the astronauts' experiences remain enigmatic, challenging our perceptions of existence and the universe's boundaries. The conclusion invites us to question the very fabric of reality and the limitless possibilities that lie beyond our understanding.